We can now bring in our former Moscow correspondent, Nick Holdsworth. Nick, good afternoon. The final results have come in. Vladimir Putin clinching nearly 90% of the vote. What do we make of that?
This seems to be a reflection of the anxiety that we've seen in the Kremlin in recent weeks about opposition figures who had no hope of winning the presidential election. There are a couple of opposition figures who were taken off the ballot well before this three-day vote. This three-day vote was also unprecedented. This was designed to help people vote in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine and also to extend the time period that people had available to vote for President Putin. About £1 billion or euros was spent on electioneering by the Kremlin. There were massive placards everywhere. There was TV coverage, internet coverage. It seems that in the past, if Vladimir Putin was satisfied with 65 or 67% of the vote, now nothing less than nearly 90% would do. The official figure, according to the Kremlin today, is 87.28% on a turnout, a historic turnout of nearly 78%. Now, we have to take these results with a large handful of salt. Russia under Putin has a history of not conducting free and fair elections. There were no free, independent international observers at this election. The Kremlin says there were foreign observers, but they weren't from the OSCE, which is the organization which normally would be observing such elections. And there were multiple incidents of people telling reporters that they'd had ballots taken off them or the police peering over their shoulders as they voted. It does not seem like it is a free and fair election. And if you look at the international reaction, it's all Russia's somewhat shady friends who have welcomed this vote. President of Venezuela, for example, the Chinese president, of course, because they're trying to keep Russia under their control, if you like. And in the West, it's been condemned as neither free nor fair.
Nick, something interesting we have coming into us is how Russians voted overseas. This is Russians living in places like the UK, which came in at 6% for Vladimir Putin. For France and Spain, 11%. That's drastically low compared to this 90% which he's secured now. What does this tell you about the state of Russia's opposition? Is it going to be overseas, considering that there is virtually none at home?
There are two immediate responses to this. Obviously, many of those people voting overseas are people who've fled Russia in the last couple of years, people who are definitely not pro-Putin. So it's not surprising that we've seen much lower levels of support for Putin in those overseas elections. It's also less easy for the Russian authorities to fiddle those elections as they have probably done in Russia in the last few days. It also is reflective of the fact that, yes, the Russian opposition now really has no option but to operate from overseas. As we saw yesterday in Berlin, Alexei Navalny's widow, Julia Navalny, was there with about 2,000 people outside the Russian embassy. They were going to vote. I expect very few of those voted for Putin. Of course, some people will still vote for him, but what I could say is that the 87.28% who the Kremlin claims have voted for Putin over the weekend, we can probably knock a fair few percentage points off that to get down to a real figure. But nevertheless, it's unlikely that Putin would have lost, even if the election were free and fair, given the state-managed support that he's drummed up over the last quarter of a century.
Interestingly, Vladimir Putin did say that Alexei Navalny's wife has lost her ties to the motherland. Nick, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for that, Nick Holdsworth there.